Well, thank you all very much for having me here. It's an honor. Uh, Jack Goodman would be proud. Uh, he's uh, he asked us to come and participate in this show way back when we were still having the Cowboy Artist Show at the Phoenix Art Museum. And so we started at the old place downtown and have been here, and we love coming here. We love all the people in the area. There's such a rich area of west here in Tucson. And Tucson has had its own wonderful artists, Howard Turpenings and the Ken Rileys and Kuhn and Don Crowley and on and on and on. They're quite a group of artists. I was so fortunate as a young age to be accepted into the Cowboy Artists of America. It was a group I knew of but never thought I would ever become a member of. I'm self-taught artist. I haven't had any education in art as far as that goes. When I got interested in it was during a period of time when anybody that was teaching art was into cubism and abstract art. If you mentioned realism to you, they just looked at you like you were stupid and said, well, just take a picture of it and forget it, you know? There wasn't anywhere to go, so I actually had to buy books and, try and just struggle and make mistakes and try and start. Never ever thought I'd be making my living as an artist. I just loved doing what I wanted to do. And my goal at that period of time was to try to make the next piece better than the previous one. Sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. But it just slowly grew. My hero was George Phippen. George Phippen was a Prescott artist, a very talented individual. And I used to tear off all the covers of Western Horseman and tack them up to the barn wall, so I could look at George Phippen's work. Of course, I had Russells tacked up there too, but I didn't know a whole lot about art. In an early year, my folks, while Mary and I were going together, George had a one-man art show downtown Prescott at a local bank. And my mom and dad said, come and go with us and go see George Phippen's artwork. Well, I saw the bronze sculptures and I was absolutely fascinated. Had no idea how you made that, but I have to try. So I bought the wrong kind of clay. I was trying to sculpt Western art out of pottery clay. Did not work very well. So anyway, we called up and Mrs. Phippen, and George had passed away. I never did get to meet him. But I went to school with the two of his sons. And anyway, they lived in Skull Valley and called up Mrs. Phippen and asked if she would look at my artwork. I had made a coat hanger frame and put a little bucking horse on there and, what all this. Anyway, took the work down there and she was very kind and never told me how bad it was. But she said, how would you like to learn the bronze casting business with my son? And I said, wow, would I? So I quit a $2 an hour job with the Forest Service, and I went to work for the Phippen family for $1.50 an hour. And we learned the bronze casting business. Now, back during that time in the 60s, bronze foundries were almost non-existent. They had all died off. And so we had to do trial and error. Anyway, long story short, I worked 8 years in the bronze foundry business. I did my artwork on my own time at home. Whenever I got a piece done, I'd take it to the foundry and show everybody. And pretty soon they'd say, well, this looks pretty good. Let's cast it and see what happens. Well, I sold a piece. So I took that money and made 2 more. And then I sold them. Well, at the end of 8 years, I made more money selling art part-time than I did working a whole year for wages. And I thought, well, I guess I better try it. So 3 years later, I got accepted into the Cowboy Artists of America, and that's been the story from there on. So one great thing is because I always had horses. I had friends that had ranches. I don't know how many hundreds of headed calves I've drugged to fires. I get to go to all these ranches and work. I team rope. My dad and I have hunted horseback for 14 years before he passed away. I had 3 horses that would pack deer, great hunting horses. Had a wonderful, wonderful time. So the part of hunting is where I came up with this idea, if horses could talk. Because how many times have I sat on a rock looking across a little canyon, and there's a guy that has hunted all morning and now he's wore out and he's headed back to camp, and he's got his gun slung over and he's plodding along, and down underneath him a little ways under a tree was a big old buck. And the old deer was turned his head listening to him walk by. And my dad and I would laugh and say, you know, that guy had no idea. And then we thought, well, dummies, how many times has that happened to me, you know? You know? So I thought, how can I make a piece like that? I can't make a canyon. So I thought, it's got to be an overhanging rock. So I put together this rock, had a cowboy sitting out on the end of it, and he's looking through his binoculars just trying to find this buck. And when I first made it, the horse was standing there, but I made the deer laying down on the ground. And he, you know, those big old bucks will hide. They'll lay flat on the ground with their chin right on the ground. And everybody's shooting at all the little deer running away. And the big one, he sneaks off, you know. And so that's what I did. And it was true, but something was lacking. So I was looking through an old hunting magazine, and there was a little thumbnail photograph in the back of it of a big deer sneaking away. I thought, oh, that's what I got to do. So I made the deer sneaking away, and of course the horse is looking at him, and the title was If Horses Could Talk. You know, so it turned out to be the most popular thing I have ever done. I sold the entire edition out in one night at the Cowboy Artist Show. I had an edition of 25, and there were 75 more names in the box. And for years, people said, redo the piece, make it, put an elk in it instead of a deer. They tried every way in the world for me to do that, and I said, no, I'm not touching that. That is what it was, and the people that were fortunate to get it got it. And they deserve the uniqueness of the piece. So years went by, Prescott is growing, and a group of people started putting monuments out in our area. So the James family that owned the Deep Well Ranch contacted us, and also Jim.
Oh, why did you look at me?
Can't say.
Chamberlain.
Chamberlain. They had gone together, and they were building homes in some of the land on the Deep Well Ranch. And they contacted me to have a meeting with them, and they said, we want to do one of your pieces on a monumental piece for the highway there on the road leaving Prescott going to Chino Valley on a roundabout. Oh, great. So I'm thinking of a bucking horse or something, He said, oh, no. We're going to do If Horses Could Talk. And I was pleased to death and amazed, because I said, well, do you realize how much that's going to cost? Because the huge majority is a rock, of the casting. And they said, we don't care. That's the piece we're going to have. So I had the honor of redoing that piece, and it's 14 feet tall, and it weighs about 4,500 pounds, 4,500 pounds. And of course, everything is life and a half. Now, I learned over years of looking at other people's work and doing things, whenever you stick a piece of artwork out in the open air, it shrinks. It just visually shrinks. And if you take a horse and you measure a horse and you do all the proportions accordingly, and you set that horse on a pedestal, it looks skinny. The legs look thin. So I purposely made my horse big, heavy legs, broad, real heavy. But when you see him out there in the open air, he looks just right. And the same thing with the deer. I made the deer bigger than normal, and he looks really good. So anyway, we will start off right now with If Horses Could Talk. Oh, well, this is a little rundown. Part of my success in life is I got to meet John Wayne. I did a piece of John Wayne taken from the movie The Searchers, and I never in the world thought of ever meeting him. But her father was on a school board with one of John Wayne's business partners. Well, he was bragging on his son-in-law, told the guys that he had done a piece of John Wayne's, and the guys piped up and he said, well, I'm one of John Wayne's business partners. I want to see this piece. So we took the piece down to her dad. He went to a meeting, showed it. We ended up getting to meet John Wayne. He got a piece. All the business partners bought a piece. And John Wayne bought 2 or 3 other pieces of mine on top of it. And we delivered everything. He was having a cattle sale at Stanfield. They had a big sale barn there, the 26 bar, and sat on the tailgate of my truck drinking coffee out of a styrofoam cup with John Wayne. Anyway, I had a piece where the horse is being spooked by a covey of quail, and he wanted the 26 bar brand on that horse's hip. So years later, while we're watching him on TV he gave an interview with Barbara Walters before he died at his home in Newport Beach. And the camera's panning between the two of them, and sitting on the coffee table is my 26 bar horse, bucket horse. So that was neat. Well, that's kind of hard to see, but that's me. The first monument I did was for Prescott, was called Prescott Early Settlers. It had a miner, a freighter, a rancher, and a pioneer woman. And Arizona Highways did a big story on it. There it is. That's on the entrance to town. Go ahead, dear. Okay, there's a picture of If Horses Could Talk. You know, the horse is saying, hey, over here, stupid. Now, this is another monument I did for the city of Glendale. It's called a territorial sheriff. Interesting story. I was hired to do the 26 Rangers, Arizona Rangers. You know, most people have heard of Texas Rangers. A lot of people don't know that Arizona actually had Rangers, Arizona Rangers. 26 Men was a TV program they had back in the 50s. They only lasted about 3 years, and they totally cleaned up the border between Mexico and Arizona. They got rid of all the rustlers and all the bad men and everything.
Bring them back.
So anyway, here I am working on this.
That's our daughter.
That's our daughter. She's now 40 years old. But this is down at the city of Glendale. And he's holding a Model 95 Winchester. And anyway, long story short, when I did the small one and it won the contest, we started doing the big one, they took it before the city council in Glendale. Well, one of the guys on the council said, that looks just like my great-grandfather who was a sheriff. So I had to change the name from Rangers to the territorial sheriff. So that's politics for you. Okay, this was a real honor. I got to do, it's a 9-foot statue of Arizona DPS officer memorial at the main office off of 19th Avenue and Encanto Way. He's standing there, and there's a wing coming off in front of his feet, like 2 directions, and it's bronze plaques of all officers killed in the line of duty. And I was very, very honored to do that. Now, this is a friend of mine, Bob Norris. I don't know if any of you have ever been familiar with Bob Norris. He has a ranch out of Colorado Springs called the T-Cross. He's known for his horses, breeding his horses, T-cross ranches. But he was a great, great collector of mine, and he had given money to rebuild the rodeo grounds in Colorado Springs. He calls me on the phone and he said, Bill, you got to help me out. I gave these guys down here a bunch of money to help rebuild the rodeo entrance to the building there. And he said, now they want to put up a statue of me. So they had some artist picked out, and I told them, oh, hell no, anybody going to do a statue of me, it's going to be Bill Nebeker. And I said, well, I'm really honored, Bob, but I don't consider myself a portrait artist. He said, I don't care, you'll make me look like a cowboy. Well, fortunately, I did a pretty good job of making it look like Bob Norris. He was very happy with it. Now, this one here is a piece that we just decided to do ourselves. I did a smaller version of this. This was an 1870s Texas Ranger. He's got the old style saddle. He's got a Henry Winchester. He's got a third generation Colt Dragoon pistol. And that thing was really, really popular. So I did a larger version. This is about an 8-foot tall figure. Of course, I had to make him look like Gus just a little bit, you know. So, but that is in a museum in San Antonio, Texas. Now, here we are with the If Horses Could Talk. It's 14 feet tall, and I did it at a foundry there in Prescott Valley. They did a great, great job. This was a really an endeavor to do this piece. I started with part of the base and the cowboy. I worked on him first and got him finished, and then they started making molds. This is a foam. I mentioned that to make the big one, we used to have to weld up an armature like a horse made out of steel, ribs, and you had to weld all the metal together. Well, now they got a method where they take a computer, you put your small one there, and the computer, as it turns on a turntable, this laser reads the image and stores it in the computer. Now, you go down and you take your information, and there's a company here in town. In fact, one of your foundry here in Tucson does this. And they buy this, it's industrial styrofoam. It isn't real crumbly like a regular styrofoam, it's denser. And it comes in 4x6 sheets. And they've got this robotic arm. It's a great big pedestal that goes up towards the ceiling, and it's got a robot arm on it with a diamond drill. And they stack all this styrofoam up, and then they go into the computer and pull up the image that you want, and they say, okay, let's make from the horse's head back to the shoulders. And they program it, and that laser blade cuts it out of styrofoam. So now I can just stick the styrofoam up and put clay on top of the styrofoam. It's all in pieces. I have to kind of glue it together, and you got to put a piece of metal in it to support it. But it has really made life easier for the sculptor. So anyway, that white stuff you see is made out of styrofoam, and I had to carve it because it's never perfect. All the undercuts are filled in, so you got to take a sharp knife and cut in all the undercuts. You got to cut the eyes out, you got to cut the ears open, all the detail work you got to cut. And I would be standing in a great big pile of styrofoam, and I told the foundry guys I was Edward Scissorhands, Only it was styrofoam. So. Anyway, once you get the styrofoam done, then you start putting clay on it. What have you got? What?
I'm going, just a minute. Here.
Oh, now there's the cowboy, and that's the styrofoam. And you see the hands with the binoculars are gone. And I had to do those separately. So now I'm putting clay on the same thing, on the same piece. I mean, I lived out at that foundry for months, and months and months. So now there's the binoculars and the hands. It's very crude right there at the moment. So I had a lot of work to do. Now it's starting to become refined. And now the cowboy's starting to be refined. You can see him looking better. Now, this is the rock. This is the base. They had to mark each one of those areas because you painted rubber in there, and that's what you made for the mold. It all had to be where it all come apart, so they had to have them numbered so they would know how to put it back together. Now these are pieces that are cast all laying out on the ground. These are called panels. The bronze is cast hollow in sections, and then all these sections have to be welded back together. And wherever you weld, you got to grind that down and refinish it so that you can't tell where the weld was. If it was textured, you got to put the texture back in. And you know, you look and look and look, and you can't see where anything was welded together. Now, this was a horse I started working on. And I think I told you that I made the horse big and thick and heavy, heavier than normal. So, what are they doing there? I guess they got.
She's painting
She's
the
painting.
thing before you put the clay on, the wax before you.
Oh,
put the
she
clay
was
on.
painting the wax on it, right. To seal the styrofoam, you take hot melted wax in a brush and you just paint it on. Once it hardens, then it seals it, and you put your clay right over it. And the clay will stick to it. Now there's my horse, it's starting to come along. I lived on that ladder,
That's why you had to have.
and when I got off and went home, I walked sideways, so. Because I was, and that horse is starting to look like, now, you see the different colored, I made my buckles out of wax, which was kind of a reddish color of wax. And I created and made my own conchos on the headset up there, and it has my wife's and mine initial on there, M and B. Now there's a saddle blanket under the saddle. When I was up on the ladder, I was using a tool and making some texture to make it look like it, you know. And then I'd get down off the ladder and the thing was so big that it disappeared. Didn't look like there was anything there. So I started taking clay and rolling it out like a worm, you know, till it was about the size of my little finger. And then I actually made it look like a woven Navajo rug. Each one of those lines was an individual piece of clay rolled up and put in place.
It was huge.
And when that thing was cast, that blanket just really separated the saddle from the horse. And it looked really good. Now, this is a brand I put on the horse's left front shoulder. It is a T-H hanging J. Well, T is for my son Travis, H is for my daughter Heather, and the hanging J is for my daughter Jeannie. So I put their brand on there. You can see how I made, whoops,
I'll go back.
you can see how I made the concho out of,
No, not the concho then.
well, I made the
saddle
cinch.
The cinch.
Made the cinch out of, I used that same kind of texture that I did the blanket to make it look like a woven cinch. I don't know what's going on there. I guess he's,
You were cutting down the stirrups things, I think.
I can't hardly tell.
Says details to stirrup and saddle fenders. Yes.
Oh, the saddle fenders I was working on, the stirrups and stuff. Okay. It's kind of hard to see. Well, you can see how big that horse is with me standing on a ladder right there. And there's a bunch of the foundry people.
Well, no, the second one from the right is the man that paid for it. Thank you very much, Ron.
Oh, yeah, Ron James. Yeah, thank you. He's the important part of the group. Okay, and I started working on the deer. I had to come up with antlers. So I took copper wire and made a big 4-point antler and welded it together. And there's the wax on the deer. And then I started putting clay on it. And there's the antlers I ended up making. That's wax. I put wax on those copper horns I made. I would wrap tin foil around them and then seal it with wax. Put tin foil around it, seal it with wax. And I kept making them, and they looked huge. And I thought, well, geez, this is big enough. and I would go out to the foundry and stick them up there. Oh, they're too skinny. I had to go back home, keep adding to it, thinking, my word. But that's what they ended up looking like right there.
And
Which is
what
enormous.
are Bill's big Indian houses and buffaloes?
Yeah. Now there's the deer with the antlers attached. Now there is the piece they're starting to put together. You can see how tall it is. The guy's been up there with the binoculars. The foundry crew there is phenomenal at that foundry.
They can give tours.
And they also give tours. If you ever get to Prescott on a Thursday, you can call ahead of time and they have a tour. It starts at about 11 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock, and you go all through the process in the foundry, and then as you end it, they pour molten metal into a mold. That you can see them pour hot metal. Okay, it's starting to come together. This is the bronze, and they were welding stuff together and grinding.
That's the clay, dear. And it's
Oh, that's
Travis
still the
and you.
clay. I thought that was after the mold had
That's
been
the
made.
clay, and that's with you and Travis. Sorry, guys. Oh, and
Now, see, there's the rubber molds that they're making on individual sections of the cowboy. And this is the confusing part of the casting. They have to attach a pour cup and a series of runners go to strategic parts of the wax, and they dip it in this big vat of ceramic shell. It's a liquid ceramic shell. And each time you dip it in there, it adheres itself and drains off, but it gets thicker each time. And this stuff is hard. I mean, when it dries, it gets extremely hard. Well, they make it till it's about 1.5 inches or 2 inches thick. And then that whole thing is put in the oven and cooked. And the wax inside turns to molten, it melts, drains out. We have a drain system on it. So all the wax inside melts out, leaving an empty void. So now when you pour the molten metal in, it runs down and fills up the empty void. And when you break it all off, you got a bronze casting. So this is the bronze casting of the hat. Kind of got a cold spot on it, didn't quite fill in that part of the brim, but they welded that up. Now this was still the clay on the deer. They laid it down to make molds of it. They use a silicon rubber, and the silicon rubber is amazing. Now, in bronze castings in the ancient times, like Russell and Remington, ancient time, it was always said that you tried to get the first few numbers you could are the ones you sought, because the product material of rubber was not very good. So each time you poured hot wax in it to make a wax, when you peeled rubber off, you lost a little bit of the surface. So each surface became rougher and rougher and rougher texture. So the first casting was nice and shiny, and the last casting looked like it needed to be sanded or something, So, but with the silicon rubber, you can't tell the difference between number 30 and number 1. They're all the same, because that product is an amazing silicon rubber. There was the molds of the antlers.
that's the deer head without ears or horns?
Yeah, that's it, without ears or horns. They got him set up with a pour cup, and he's being dipped in the ceramic shell. Now this is when they're melting the metal down. They all got these fireproof suits on for protection, and they pour a great big crucible. They got a big crane system that comes over and picks up this molten pot, carries it out, and they're pouring the metal out of this pot down into those ceramic molds. And then that mold, the only way you can get the piece out of it is to physically hammer and break all of the ceramic shell off. And it's a chore. They vibrate it, they bang on it, they do every kind of thing in the world, but you got to be careful and not damage the bronze. So they bang on all the sprues and all the things. Now that was the deer laying there, and they've got all kinds of sections welded back together. and all of that has to be ground down. Well, that's back to a clay. Oh, now they're welding the rock together, and the guy's in on the inside, and they had to weld braces on the inside between walls to hold everything together and give it strength, because it was gonna be up holding up that big horse. So it's quite an experience thing to see.
That's the inside of it.
That's the inside of the horse.
That's the inside of the cowboy.
Oh, the cowboy.
Yes.
Oh, it says over there, doesn't it?
I made it, he just.
Oh, there. Oh, that was no, that's the
No,
metal.
they're welding, dear.
Yeah, look how nice and clean those chaps, the leggings are, and he's got a vest on, the binoculars. They use a heliarc welder, puts instantaneous heat to the bronze, because bronze has so much copper in it that it absorbs the heat, just spreads. So you got this heliarc, and you step on a pedal, and it's instantaneous welding right there on the spot. It's really an amazing thing. Now they're getting ready to set the cowboy down on the rock. And there's the mold of the horse, all divided up in sections. Each one of those sections will be poured separately. A wax head of the horse.
Inside the mold.
And there's the bronze neck and stuff being welded back on the body. And there's the thing, it's the whole half laying on its side, the body laying on its side. And there's a guy on the inside of the horse. They had to weld braces across. Oh, and he's using a hydraulic jack, because some of the pieces you have to spread them to, get them back in line.
So you're doing that to make the pieces fit together? Is that what it is?
That's right. Because no matter how careful you are, when you start putting the pieces together, sometimes the wax melted or bent a little bit. It's not quite in line, so they got to straighten it up to where it's in line before they can weld it together. And that's the horse coming along.
Hanging from the ceiling.
And you can see that I had the rifle and the scabbard on the side of the horse. You finally see the rifle.
And the tail looks a mess.
Yeah, the tail looks a mess right there. The headless horse, huh? Yeah,
He's a Carl's patina in it.
yeah, they got it.
Do they know what a patina is?
Well, patinas are done, the bronze has so much copper in it that it's real susceptible to change. Like if you throw a penny on the ground and leave it there, it'll eventually turn green. So you apply heat to heat the bronze up, and then you put on chemical. They mix chemicals, and the chemical acid reacts with the copper, and you can create colors. Green, blue, black, browns, grays. You can create all these different colors. So there's a big hoist. They got him up there, putting the horse up on top of the piece. Inside the horse's legs were stainless steel pipe. And in the base was a stainless steel pipe, was bigger, so that we put the smaller stainless steel rod down inside the bigger one, and that's what held the horse in place. Yeah, this guy with the crane, he was really, really good at this. We were worried to death about whether those pipes in the bottom of the legs were going to go down through the pipes in the base, because it had to be exact. There it is, all finished and patinaed. And this is what it looks like. They were getting ready to put it on the roundabout out there. It's the last roundabout on 89 going to Chino Valley by the airport. This guy picked that thing up and had to swing it way around up on top of the hill.
That's me. It was amazing.
During all this kind of stuff is when you're holding your breath.
Yes. Men underneath it, you worry if somebody's gonna get killed.
And then we had to get that horse up there. We were all worried about that.
And you've got guys up there holding the legs thinking, don't lose your fingers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, there we go.
And I've had people tell me that they go out to the roundabout and they just drive around and then they go park the car and switch over and the other person drives while the other one's looking.
There is an empty lot across one of the streets that if we have company come, we go park across the street and then wait till there's no cars and run across the street. Go out there and take pictures.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. But I didn't pay for it, so I wasn't gonna worry about it.
Well, there it is.
We've got some more.
Now, just a quick word. Since that period of time, I was very fortunate. I was contacted by the local sheriff's department, and they contracted me to make a 1880s territorial sheriff. They wanted a monument to fallen officers in Yavapai County. And so on the courthouse plaza, I have the honor of having a monument there with Solon Borglum's Bucky O'Neill piece. It's been there since like 1909 or something like that. So I had it, he's standing there and he's got his hat over his leg and his head's bowed and he's looking at a pair of empty cowboy boots. And it's called Empty Boots, and it's a Lest We Forget, it's called. And there it is, it's on a big granite rock. And this last one that I just have been finishing up, I got sidelined because I ended up with back surgery in April. I'm just now walking without pain. I couldn't even come down to the show. I apologize, I missed out on the show. Just that recent that I had so much pain down my legs, I couldn't do this. So thank God I'm to a point where I can walk now, and my back still aches, but I don't have them sharp pains. So this piece, during World War I, we had a local boy named Ernest A. Love, graduated from Prescott High School in 1914.
Yep, 1914.
And he went to Stanford University in California, and he was in engineering. He was in his third year when the war broke out, World War I. He was absolutely fascinated with airplanes. And he was an A1 student. He always graduated top of his class. He went to an induction center and said he would join the Army if they had let him fly. So they looked at his records and said, oh, yeah, absolutely, So they sent him immediately to San Diego to flight school, and he went to France, and 2 months before the war ended, he got shot down and killed. And so the local fathers changed the name of our airport to Love Field all those years ago. Well, once they saw my fallen officer memorial, they said, you know something, they had just remodeled the terminal. Geez, couldn't say it. The terminal, and they said, we want a statue of Ernest A. Love. And so he's 8 feet tall. He's got on his World War I flight outfit, leather coat with sheepskin, high leather boots. And I got him, he's holding a clipboard, of course, with, checking your flights and all your, and then the way they've got him set, he's shielding his eyes from the sun and he can watch all the planes take off and land, So
Should be
I
unveiled in
had that about 20% or 80% done when I got my surgery, and I just got it finished about 2 weeks ago. I just couldn't go work on it. Well, thank you for your patience. If you have any questions, yes,
I'm curious, how long did it take you to do
the giant piece. It was 6 months or something like that. Yeah, I think it was a good 6 months working on. And I mean, I was out there every day, except weekends. I would get there about 9:30 and work till 4 o'clock every day.
And then he worked at home on certain pieces of it.
Yeah, and other things I would take home and work on it from there. Yes,
At what point does the styrofoam get out of the picture?
it stays in the picture.
Okay.
Yeah, that is your internal part of the piece.
So is it part of the burnout?
Well, no. Once you make the rubber molds, you no longer need the clay or the styrofoam. Once you got the molds, then the wax is what's going to be burnt out. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Bill,
Another question.
Yes.
who orchestrates kind of the process? I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here.
You mean on my end or the foundry end?
Both.
Both? Well, on my end, I just had to make it look. We did have to change it. I had to re-sculpt this piece
In clay.
in clay because if we tried to make this one life and a half size, he would have been too tall and they couldn't put him on a flatbed semi. We had to have something you could put on a flatbed and go through over all the overpasses on the highway. So I had to make it so that I cut this base down and set the horse lower down. So I had to re-sculpt it. And of course I made the horse heavier. Everything I wanted heavier, I made the small one heavier. And that's what they used to do their measurements for the part.
The foundry in Tucson, and I can't remember the name, is the one.
Yeah, I
that
can't
made
either.
Mary, can you just stand and just turn so people can hear?
There's a foundry here in Tucson, and I wished I remembered the name.
Yeah.
Crucible.
Yes, yes.
And
Yeah.
And they make.
They are a
make
bronze
big
foundry, but they
clay,
also
and
do
big
the foam. They also do the foam. So I order what I want, and the foundry that there is in Prescott Valley, they drive all the way up to Tucson, take them the image they want, and then they go back and pick up all the big pieces when they get the foam made.
And it ends up being about, 85% finish,
Yeah, it's about 85%
It
finished.
doesn't have eyeballs and
No.
ears and.
And like I said, anything that's undercut, like a collar on a, you have to cut that out with a knife. You have to trim all that stuff up. Because most of the time it's when you go from a little size to a big size, what looked good on the little one now is, it's like, it doesn't just get little bigger, it gets really bigger, thick.
I'm correcting myself. It is called Metaphysics Sculpture Studio. And it is on 44th Street in Tucson. That's all I know. Sorry.
Looking for some questions over on this side. I'm not standing here to end the discussion. I'm just here to help get the questions up. Anything? Yeah.
Bill, how many pieces was that sculpture made in when it was cast, when the bronze was cast?
I think there was in the mold itself to make the waxes was 158 pieces. Yes.
Now, Bill, if you look back at the historic sculptures that you know, who would you think would be proud of the work you're doing today?
Well, I would hope George Phippen would be.
Sola Morgan.
And his work is was my inspiration. I grew up making things from the time I was a little kid. All my buddies, they grew up drawing. They would go to church, instead of singing a hymn, they'd be drawing something in the back of the hymn book. You know, they just constantly were drawing. I didn't do that. I was always making things. I would whittle dogs and horses, and then I'd get leather and I'd cut out and make a miniature saddle to fit on the horse, and I just was always making things. I'd see a movie and then I'd go home and make a canoe and float it in the creek, and you know, I just was always making things. And when I was taken, when I saw George Fippin's work, of course I'd seen the paintings, and like I said, any cow camp you went to in Arizona, there was a picture torn off of Western Horseman stuck to the bunkhouse wall of George Fippin's. I mean, he was highly liked by cowboys. He did cowboy art. And I never got to meet the man. When I went to that one show with my wife, he had too many people around him. I was too shy. I never went and talked to him. And he passed away before I ever got, you know. But his work, and I always tell people, he 55 years, he died at 55. He was just beginning to really hit his stride. He would have been the Howard Turpinning of his time, because George could do everything. He did sculpture, he did oils, he did watercolors, he did charcoals, he did pen and ink. He did everything, which is unusual. Joe Peeler could do that. Johnny Hampton could do that. They were the old style artists. If you took one of those guys and handed him a piece of paper while he was sitting here listening to all this, he would just sit there and draw you the dangest scene you have ever seen. Bucking horse, cow running in the, rope hung up on. I mean, they just did it.
Tell him about Joe Beaver's drawing of you and your horse.
Oh, I got to tell you a little. When I first got into CA, I was a young guy, see. So I just had a saddle made, and I was really tickled about it. So the CA guys, some of us got invited to Houston. They had a big show there. It was the top auction horse and cattle and art. They would auction off a horse, auction off a cow, auction off a piece of art. Western Heritage. And you had to wear a tuxedo to go to the thing. So I'm on my first airplane ride. We're both on our first airplane ride going to Houston. So Joe Beeler was sitting behind me a little bit, and I was talking to somebody across the aisle about my new saddle. The next thing I know, there's a tap on my shoulder. I turn around, and Joe hands me a piece of paper. And on it is the ugliest horse you have ever seen in your life. Ewe-neck, cow hocked in the back, just ugly, and a spanking brand new saddle. And underneath he said, Bill's new saddle and his favorite rope horse. That's the way Joe was. But all those guys, Johnny Hampton, you could hand him a piece of paper, and I mean, they would just sit there, and it wasn't just a face or something. I mean, it was an action scene. Dog chasing somebody, horse bucking off, the cow running through a fence. I mean, these heavy action, and they just had it in them. There wasn't any camera, no picture they're looking at. It was action pieces, and I always really admired that.
I think we have, the question here, and I think we have time for this one last question.
How much is the price of bronze going up and why?
Oh, boy.
China,
Yeah.
sorry.
China was a big part of it. Before all of this crash happened, previous, China bought up all the copper, wire. They were shipping lumber and copper wire to China. And you couldn't find a piece of plywood to buy. They were all gone, And so the price of copper started climbing. The foundry, my little foundry that I used, a regular pallet stacked 3 high with 20-pound ingots. that they had bought for years for $3,000. Within 1 year's time, it went to $10,000. And of course, they had to raise the price, you know. They had to raise the price, but every time we turned around, they had to raise the price because it just kept going up and up and up. And now everything has gone up with the crap we're in, pardon my French, that we are in now. It isn't just one item. It's anything shipped in a truck to any business has had the price raised because of the cost of fuel. And then it goes to the buyer and, you know, right on down the line. Anything you buy, your sand, you know, any material you buy has just gone up astronomically. Casting price. Well, you can't just keep raising your price to sell your piece, you know. So you're probably making less now on a piece than you did 15 years ago, you know.
Let's not cry.
Of course, we're not, you know, there's nothing you can do about it, and we're glad that it goes on the way it goes on, but it is definitely an item.
Just one. Bill has this piece, this size, it's 4 feet tall, and it's for sale. I was told I couldn't do it commercial, but I did anyway.
Bill, if there's time for just one more here? Mary's got something.
Do what now? Yeah, the people we talked, yeah, the people, you know, like the sheriff's department, it was all donated money. You know,
Use government money.
people just came in and gave money to raise money to do that piece. Ron James, him and his business partner footed the bill for the
And
casting
it
of
was
If Horses Could
$500,000
Talk,
to build the big one.
you know, just to do the casting.
$500,000 to build the big one.
So,
Bill, we missed a question
Okay.
over here.
I have a question. You're so talented, and you have your daughter, I saw in there. Is your family onto this to carry on with you?
Your kids, any of your kids are artists, basically.
oh, well, they all have talent, but they've gone different directions with it.
One daughter's a writer.
My son actually works and is part owner in a bronze foundry,
The one that John Coleman uses.
the one that John Coleman uses. And my other daughter's my Jeannie, the young one that lives here in Tucson. She's an author. She writes books, kind of fantasy books like ancient times, you know. And my other daughter is a gym coach. She coaches gymnastics. None of them really took up anything to do with the art itself.
I think all that they're doing is art. It's just
Well,
a
it is
different
a
type
different
of art.
type, a different type, yes.
And did I miss anybody else? Well, it's probably time to finish up. There's just one last thing, as I was doing a little bit of research, that you were honored by the Arizona Historical Society with the Arizona Culture Keeper Award.
Oh, yes,
For
yeah.
outstanding
Wow.
contributions to the history, art, civic leadership, and entrepreneurial spirit. And that's basically all of the sculptures enriching so many cities here in Arizona. So thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, thank you so much.
Wendy, thank you so much for moderating. And Bill and Mary, this was incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your art and just the wonder of your work. It's just incredible.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. We have a little gift for you.
Oh,
right
goodness,
here.
goodness. Wow.
And as I mentioned, next month we have Mark Body coming on February 6th. Hope you all can come back. Mary and Bill, we'd love you to come back.
Well,
As
thank you
much
very
as-
much.
And as often as you can.
Well, thank you.
Thank
We
you
we
for-
plan on it.